I went to Korea to learn about Korean culture, only to realize after I came home the culture I really learned more about was my own. I used to think how Americans valued freedom above all else, one of our greatest strengths. But after living in Korea, I realized that what we Americans call freedom, Koreans may call social chaos. That single realization is when I realized the implications of the stark differences between American and Korean culture. Today, I'm going to share the 3 most surprising things I realized about America only after living in Korea. The invisible American rule. My freedom outweighs your peace. Americans are loud. This is not to say that Koreans never get animated or loud, because that's definitely not true. If you've ever been to a surgery, you know that the ajishis in there be getting animated and loud. However, in most public spaces in Korea, it is an unspoken rule to be mindful of others and that you're in a shared space. This means no loud conversations on the bus or subway, no eating or drinking on the subway, picking up your trash after leaving the park, and no yelling or playing loud music in public spaces. In America, it's jarring to come home and see trash on the street, left at the park, people throwing trash out their car windows, no joke. Overhearing Joe's personal conversation with his wife, someone with a loudspeaker at the beach, people talking and laughing very loudly, or even arguing in front of lots of people. Americans tend to be more concerned about their own interests rather than public interest. My first moment of reverse culture shock was only a couple weeks ago in the Las Vegas airport. When my mom and I were going through security, our bags got taken aside to be checked, and there started to be a really long line of bags that needed to be checked. So obviously, there were a lot of frustrated people waiting, including myself. However, a family behind me decided to make their frustrations loudly known through cursing and blaring complaints. I realized in that moment that was not something I was used to seeing in Korea. And safe to say I was missing Korea a little bit in that moment. But I am not quite innocent either. I am American myself after all. I've been caught a few times breaking these unspoken shared rules of respecting public space while living in Korea. My friend and I were once laughing so hard as we got onto a bus that the bus driver literally shushed us into oblivion, and my little heart was so ashamed, and I felt so bad. We caught ourselves on a few different occasions speaking very loudly on public transportation, and it was in that moment how American I realized I am. But more than Americans being physically loud, I feel like Americans tend to be a little bit more outspoken, whether that's to our benefit or to our detriment. I felt early on while living in Korea that Koreans don't really like to talk about politics with friends, family, or posting it on social media. Whereas in America, while some people don't enjoy talking about politics, it's much more embedded into our everyday conversations and everyday life. This may be because I'm more invested in my own country's politics, but while I was living there, it seemed like Koreans tend to avoid uncomfortable topics with friends and family. However, I was in Korea at the time when martial law was declared. I think a lot of people, even if you weren't in Korea, may have remembered that moment. During that time, I witnessed incredibly large protests, and almost everybody I knew was posting their school's public statements about their disagreement with martial law on their Instagram stories. I realized in that moment, maybe I was wrong about the fact that Koreans aren't very outspoken. Maybe for Koreans, it's more about time and place. My only point is in that everyday conversation with coworkers or friends or family, it seems that politics and social issues tend to be less a part of the conversation. To be honest, I kind of miss being able to talk about social issues and politics the way I do in America while I was in Korea. Korea's public restraint creates predictable social safety, while American individual autonomy produces high social ambiguity. These contrasting approaches to public space reveal a cultural trade-off between personal autonomy and social harmony. The predictable nature of Korea and cleanliness creates a sense of collective safety. In contrast, the American tolerance for public noise, litter, and open conflict is a direct cost of our extreme individualism. Since American culture places a premium on unfiltered self-expression and assumes the burden of dealing with inconvenience in public is on the individual, like if someone's being loud in public, you can just ask them to be quiet. The shared public environment becomes a constant battleground of competing individual interests. This freedom allows Americans to freely speak their mind and sometimes bypass social formality, but sacrifices the social cohesion and psychological peace that sometimes comes from living in a more collectively maintained environment, like Korea. English, a language without respect? Knowing the social hierarchy in Korea is crucial if you're going to live there long term. This social hierarchy extends beyond older, wise individuals with lots of wrinkles, but pertains to people above you at school, work, your family, or even any stranger you interact with on the street. These levels of respect are embedded in the Korean language, making it really difficult for an English speaker like me who has never used honorifics in her life. Essentially, it's incredibly stressful. America has a general rule of respecting your elders, but it's not followed in any way resembling Korea. We often treat our bosses like our friends. We can call them by their first names and it's fine. Regardless of your age, everyone really receives the same amount of respect and we talk to everyone pretty much the same. You can say things in a more polite way, but it's not actually embedded into the grammar of English. Does that make it a disrespectful language? I don't know. But it definitely makes it hard when you're living in Korea and your own language has no sign of honorifics. The level of stress that left me when I realized I didn't have to worry about the age or status of someone I was speaking to in America. It's really something I admire about Korean culture, but I will say that I did miss the comfortability of being in America and knowing I didn't have to be so aware of that all the time. I have several experiences where I've been corrected on my politeness and or honorifics. I was once out to dinner with my friend's parents and grandmother, ironically without my friend, so it was just me and the parents and the grandmother. I was trying to do my best to speak Korean with all the proper honorifics. I was so focused trying to use all the grammar correctly, but I ended up asking the grandmother a question like, "What about you?" using the term you. However, in Korean, people don't really use the word you to someone they want to be respectful to. It's kind of considered rude, like 당신? No, you don't do that. And I learned the hard way. In English, saying, "Oh, what about you?" is a completely normal statement and not rude at all. But in Korea, you call them by their title, not you. So very sweetly, this grandmother explained to me this concept and I felt bad, but they were really nice about it. This experience made me realize just how lax we are in America about respect and social hierarchy, and I will say this was something I kind of missed. This absolutely affects how Americans interact with authority. We have less of a barrier to challenge authority, yet this lack of social hierarchy possibly sacrifices greater social cohesion. From flannels to athleisure, the American dress code. Koreans value appearances and hygiene, generally speaking. Landing in Seoul, you immediately feel that Koreans have an entirely different standard for dress. To me, it was seriously the first thing I felt and observed in Korea. Korea's mainstream fashion, from my perspective, includes button-ups, pleated skirts, blazers, sweaters for sure. I love a good cardigan. Gray sweats, black trim glasses, low top Converse, nylon cinch dresses and skirts, especially if you're in Seongsu. I swear I just see those like everywhere, like this nylon material, wide-legged jeans and skirts. And I will say those are also pretty popular in America. Now, America, or should I say Utah, because that's where I live, so that's where I'm getting my reference. I would say every state has its own dress code. Where I live, it's flannels, Nike Jordans, athleisure, Nike sweatshorts, sport merch or university merch, university hoodies, straight leg or skinny jeans, and Uggs. I do own a pair of Uggs, and I love them. Essentially, a much more casual, dressed down version of Seoul, generally speaking. I do notice that people tend to take less fashion risks in Seoul, while people probably dress a little bit more uniquely, not everyone, but you'll see a little bit more individuality in America for sure. As someone who loves fashion, I know what I'm wearing right now is really basic, but whatever. I can dress a little bit weird sometimes. My American friend in Korea told me that when she lived there, she missed a lot of the individuality that was in her own hometown. People in my town, though, they tend to dress down and very casual. I really liked how in Seoul, it felt like everyone kind of had a standard of how they're supposed to dress. I kind of like how everyone just dresses nicely. No one really goes to the store in their pajamas like they do in my town. At Kyunghee University, I had a time where I had to go to the store with no makeup, a hoodie, and some pajama shorts because I was starving and I did not have time to put on makeup, shower, do the whole shebang, okay? But immediately after I left the house and I started seeing everyone in their nicely pressed blazers, in their work clothes, in their school clothes, I started to close my hoodie a little bit so no one could see me. And when I got into the store, I felt so much more seen because of how dressed down I was. People were staring at me more than they usually do because when you're a foreigner, you always get a little bit of stares, but people kind of mind their business. But people were staring at me like I was looking a little bit homely. It clocked then that Korea, it just has a different standard for dress and hygiene than we do in America. And that's just my observation. Koreans highly value looks, and it's considered a big asset. Having a nice appearance is essentially just having another thing to add to your resume. The pressure to be beautiful feels even higher in Korea than it does in the United States. Americans treat looks less outwardly as social capital and more as a personal individual pursuit. Both countries have high beauty standards, for sure, don't get me wrong, but we practice them differently and in different playing fields. Ultimately, guys, this is the lesson of living abroad. It doesn't just teach you about them. It teaches you the invisible code of you. Today we've talked about how American culture prioritizes individual freedom, leading to the ambiguity and noise of our public spaces, the relaxed nature of our view on respect, and how appearance is more of a personal pursuit rather than a social demand. It's a culture of great liberty and freedom, but it often comes at the cost of collective peace and social cohesion. Korea's structure sacrifices that immediate freedom for social harmony, predictable relationships, and a collective sense of order. The biggest takeaway from this video isn't that one system is better. It's more that I now have a second operating system for my own mind. This is the mindset I'm taking with me to Japan. If you guys didn't know, I will be heading to Japan next spring. So if you want to stay tuned on this journey of self-exploration through discovering the world, hit that subscribe button and let's keep exploring this strange world together. What's one invisible rule that you've learned about your own culture that you only could realize until after you went to another country? Let me know in the comments down below. Thanks so much for watching, you guys, and see you next time. Love you. Annyeong!